growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.
Hey, what's up? You are back again on the Go-to-Market Cheat Code. About mid-season at this point, I think. Joined once again by Mr. Josh Wagner. Josh,
Hey, how's it going?
how goes it on this beautiful Tuesday?
It's good. We're back in action.
We certainly are. Brief Labor Day holiday, and we're back at it. Joined by another great guest under our heading of marketing, Mr. Adam Needles. He's currently the CEO and co-founder of a group called ANNUITAS. If you've been in the B2B, GTM, growth, marketing, sales space, that whole kind of soup, you've certainly probably seen Adam, heard of ANNUITAS. He's been with that organization for quite some time. I think prior to that, Chief Strategy Officer, played a lot of roles in terms of helping clients devise their go-to-market strategy, actually put those in practice, which is always the challenge. Also, the author, if I can speak, of the Chief Growth Officer's Handbook. I can get all of that out in one sentence. And he's got it right there as well. So
I just realized I had a copy on my desk, so I'm just going to do this.
Visual.
I'm going to just cheat right there.
It's called product placement right there. Without further ado, Adam, welcome to the show.
Well, hello guys. I'm excited to be here and great to reconnect Justin. Sorry, I almost said Dustin.
No worries. I normally get Josh, but either one of us works.
You should never take it. I was literally taking the sip of coffee right as you introed me, so it was
I saw
inevitable.
that right as I asked the question.
That's why he did it so quick.
We focus right on it out of the gate here. So let's get right into it. So the show's called The Cheat Code for a reason. What, under this lovely heading of marketing as we're operating this season, is your B2B cheat code?
Yeah, the cheat code for me is something that's sort of become a holistic piece of, how I see the market, but also how like the work that we do with clients. If I could just back up for a minute, at ANNUITAS, we work with organizations, B2B, consider purchase. They have sales forces, often in financial services, healthcare, pharma, tech, ed tech. But organizations that have sales forces and who are trying to generate demand, and particularly the last 5 years, we've seen this become more and more the case. Really great products, great solutions that they could be offering in the market, but fall into this random acts place where it's, something's not working, so they just try something else. They try something else. And the inefficiency of the go-to-market is just like going down, down, down. And downward spiral is what we sort of key into at ANNUITAS and try and help organizations recover from. And it relates to my cheat code, which is that for many of these organizations, what they've really lost is they've lost that sense of their customer, not just of the way the customer is going to engage with their product or service, but like how to actually engage with that customer. People talk about this all the time, Justin, this idea of right place, right time. And I see more and more struggle actually, particularly over the last 5 years for organizations. And the thing is that the right place, right time, like I don't want to say it's so simple, but it is like the lens has got to be that customer journey. And people talk about customer journey all the time. They talk about being customer-centric, but they get customer-centric with their product and product delivery, but they fail to be customer-centric with how they're going to market, with how they're engaging through sales and marketing. And so my cheat code quite literally is the customer journey, and it's the lens that I think we all need to be looking our go-to-market through. And I feel like that's so obvious to say, and yet it can have, like when you start to actually push all of your programs, all of your processes, all of your systems, your organizational structure through customer journey, it really changes your view. And more importantly, it really turbocharges your go-to-market.
Yeah, kind of to your point on that myopia, I think something that I see lacking in organizations all the time is just really good context as to what that actually means, right? And so I was at an event a couple months ago now, actually, but I was listening to Snowflake's CRO talk about kind of their initial product to market motion and what his day-to-day looked like. And I talked to so many people after that session that were like, wow, that was incredibly different than I thought it was going to be. Because he went out and he did nothing but talk to customers for a year, like not obviously customers, but ideal customers, prospects at that time, trying to get inside what were they doing, what were competitors providing to them, what were the gaps in that process, what did they love, what they hate, and just kind of
Totally.
bringing in all of this context to that process. And like you could actually see people saying like, wow, that's something we've never done within our organization. So same type of ask there, like from a context perspective, like why do people get it so wrong in terms of, because there's just no shortage of, hey, you need to understand the customer, be embedded within the mind of that individual. But like actually making that happen, to your point, rarely does. So like let's just go a bit deeper on what you mean by that and like how that looks from a day-to-day perspective.
Yeah. So let me talk about the why and the how. Like the why is I think a lot of organizations are actually really good at delivering delight. Like I did a graduate program at the University of Wisconsin, and it was founded by Scott Cook at Intuit. And I had the privilege to spend a couple sessions with him. And he's been an evangelist his whole career around SaaS products. And obviously what he's done with Intuit, is just a whole nother story we could go into. This idea that he brought from Procter and Gamble, he brought to software of like, hey, the core for them is to like delight their customers, right? And to do something that is, really differentiating and at a product level. And I think the SaaS software culture is great at innovating products and features, and they get their value prop right, and they're really good at understanding what customers need. But what we've seen over this intense focus on the iteration and the innovation of the product and complete abandonment of the insights that are the journey insights. And in particular, I think a lot of organizations know how to do marketing research around product, but they don't really know how to do it around go-to-market execution, around sales and marketing, phases. And the questions that they're not asking, right? They're not looking at higher order pain points. What was the issue that someone had before they looked for your product? What were those steps that led to? What was the actual composition of like how many people were involved with that buying process? Who were the influencers? What were their roles? Here's the big one. Their content consumption. People make assumptions all the time about channels. We're going to just put this much in search and, we're going to like email nurture them. And like everybody wants a shortcut. By the way, digital channels, we've seen so much declining returns on over the last couple of years with clients we're working with. But email is a great example. I have been generating demand on behalf of clients, working with clients to target so many different personas over time. And I think about email and I go, hey, CIO, CFO, great example of like two completely different personas that if I'm working with a financial institution and emailing a research report to a CFO, they're so thankful for that vendor to send them, an attachment, a research report, a document to them. They see that as value added. If a CIO has a major software company send them content, delete, right? So same channel, email, two totally different personas, treated differently. And so looking at the content consumption, I think the other thing is go look at not just what your competitors' products look like, but look at their demand experience they're delivering, right? Like their forms, their nurture, like, what are they doing? What are they asking? We've talked about the why organizations, I think, are not so good at this, but I think that, the question is how can they get better at it? And they've got to be asking different questions, Justin, than they're asking today and thinking from a different lens. And it's a whole nother set of insights that they need. They don't often have. But once you have that, it's so powerful because the email thing is a great example. Like so many organizations are really struggling right now about like, hey, how much do I double down in search? How much do I double down in paid social? How much do I double down in events and email and different channels? Where does field marketing fit in? By the way, I've seen a huge resurgence in field marketing recently as people become just so tired of the digital channels. There's this opportunity to get insights that can really inform that mix, that portfolio of engagement channels, and you can actually get it right as opposed to guessing all the time. And I think that's where we want organizations, and particularly the ones we're working with, to help them, stop screwing around for a couple of years. Like, let's accelerate the time to a hypothesis about your mix, and then you're just tuning it. You know what I mean? As opposed to guessing about it.
I mean, those conversations to me like feel like, a pretty deep discovery session, but like, do you recommend that that's done independent of sales cycles? Because it seems like that would make the most sense, but also, I feel like a lot of organizations are hesitant to to go out and kind of commit resources to that type of research when it's not specifically down the lane of I need to stimulate a deal cycle on this target account.
But I'm gonna be play devil's advocate. How do you how do you simulate a deal cycle if you don't know how to be right place, right time? If you're like screwing around trying to find and trying to connect. And some organizations have, in a haphazard way, had some initial success, but they don't know how to scale that. And so I think sometimes they then assume, oh, well, we know our customer, right? We've got some good experiences. We still don't know how to engage your customer. And so it's insights that you need. It doesn't necessarily require, let me argue, the reason to work with a firm like ours, a market research team, another consultancy, is that you're going to accelerate your time to get there. And, we can do that in weeks. The company internally will often take months or years to get there. And so I think it's a time to market kind of thing. Like, how long do you want to screw around not really knowing what your, the right combination of factors are to connect with your target customer?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. Like, doing it in-house is challenging from a lot of different angles there, but, certainly the time to value. And then, you just get that myopia of, oh, I've actually stumbled upon a buying cycle, a sales cycle that I can participate in, and suddenly that initiative kind of goes out the window. So I think formalizing that in a way that, ensures you're going to get and comprehensive results is critical there.
Customer journey, it all sounds right. You're like, oh yeah, we need to get aligned with the customer buyer journey. That all sounds good. And then say you hire ANNUITAS to go and do this, huge market research project, map it out and this and that. But then I feel like the activation is where a lot of things fall down regardless. And I think of like this super maybe narrow example when we were somewhat competitive with you guys. So we were really good at understanding what a Marketo's customer journey was going to be from the time that they made that purchase to, let's say, the next 12 to 24 months, right? We knew what was likely going to happen. So we twisted that knife and just said, hey, if you're not doing this at this point, there's a good chance you're getting frustrated and your boss is getting mad because you've spent, $100,000 on a marketing platform and you haven't even deployed a campaign yet, right? So it's a super narrow example, but we put it on a whiteboard and said, hey, we talked to our delivery team and said, what should a Marketo customer be doing at these phases, right? Now we're going to go market to that and use that as our customer journey. That's kind of manufactured to a certain extent, but how do you, in your estimation, how do you make that customer journey visible to the entire organization, right? Sales, marketing, customer success, everybody who needs to touch this customer. How do you make it something that they know and they see and they can action on?
One of the things that annoyed me to no end earlier in my career was to work with a consultant and they give you a deck and they can't help you do anything. And so from day one for us in ANNUITAS, it was always about actually activating. So I think that you're spot on, right? The challenge is how do you actually do something? And so the work that we do is not standalone insights. It's actually just a phase that's part of actually building up a demand engine model. But that's actually, I think that's the challenge that so many organizations really have, is they don't know how to actually get from point A to point B. For us, we have this sort of very simplified concept we call conversation tracks. And what we're trying to do with conversation tracks is activate the journey. And the whole idea is that, you do all the work and you squeeze it down and then you get to this MVP segmentation. And by the way, that segmentation will change by different stages. It's not parallel paths, right? Because you might have some groups that have interests at different phases, differentiated. But we want to get those conversation tracks in place because then it enables you to start to go hey, let's build some content around this. Let's build some demand programs, engaging, nurturing. Hey, let's build some sales enablement content. Hey, this gets back into the cheat code. Hey, let's make sure that our systems are actually designed around to support that conversation track journey. And this is a really big thing, right? Which is that so many organizations literally implement CRM, marketing automation, CMS as just silos that a certain group owns, right? And you've got your marketing ops people, your sales ops people, right? They don't even talk together sometimes. But your architecture, your data value chain should all be about supporting that journey. And so for us, and it's a great question, Josh, it's literally, how do you have this holistic journey, this holistic architecture of conversation tracks, and then how do you then work with content, channel, sales enablement, operations, and then your technology teams to actually make sure that every part of your people, process, content, technology are actually pushing against that conversation that you're trying to drive with that prospective customer.
What do you find in terms of like outputs here? What do you find are some of the most shocking or most insightful elements that organizations normally learn from truly going out and conducting like an in-depth customer understanding?
So we were working with a software company a number of years ago, and their CEO had brought us in, and we're going through initial insights phase and benchmarking. I still remember our data science guys had this chart, and it was showing all the different sales and marketing activities that were engaged. And at the very top, there's this really long bar, and that were all the interactions related to this outbound sales team that they had. And they had probably about a half dozen people. And so we ran that to look at the activity levels, but then we also ran what we call elasticity, where we look at and say, okay, for each given channel, what is the, per touch point, the percentage likelihood that's going to turn into a close one. And in that chart, right, whenever we ran the elasticity, the chart was literally the inverse. They've got this whole sales team that was doing all these emails, all this outreach. They had a cadence platform like a SalesLoft. I don't know what SalesLoft per se, but they had, all these different elements, and they had a whole team that was reaching out and getting in front of people. And in fact, the things that were like really turning the dial were the opposite of that. And so I think he had this moment where he's like, holy shit, I've got this whole sales organization. I've got all these salaries. And in fact, it was other things. It was some of the demos. It was some of the nurturing. It was people that were just coming in as hand raisers that were really making the difference. So I think it's really kind of eye-opening to see how much of your go-to-market activity is invested in one area. And then you realize when you do some closed loop analysis that that's not what's actually driving your outcomes.
Interesting. I really dig that concept of conversation tracks, right? Because it seems somewhat tangible to Justin's point. Like what's an output? So is this something that you're delivering across the organization as like a train the trainer? Like, listen, hey, CRO, this is what you're delivering to your demand team, to your sales team, blah, blah, blah. Like what does that look like? Because I think that's a really cool, tangible concept.
I feel like it's a two part, right? Part one is for everybody to be on the same page with like, okay, when you see the conversation track architecture, you go like, okay, now we understand, like so many times people have 20, 30, 40 different personas that they talk about.
Right. That's
and by the way, Josh, right? By the way, the persona that uses your product the most may have the least influence in the purchase. So
100%.
The product marketing guys, the product management guys are like, oh, we know who use our products and we know them really well. And these are the people that show up at their user conferences. And those are not the people that are signing the DocuSign.
That's right.
And so guess what? They don't actually know how to get to their buyers, right? And so the conversation track architecture says, who are those buyers and influencers, right? So first of all, we get aligned on the people. The other piece of that is that we get aligned on, what are their needs by stage. And then, so that's part A, right? Which is like, get everybody aligned to like, what is that, from initial touch point to initial sale. And then by the way, you need to do that post sale. You need to say, hey, at initial product success stage, all the way through to develop and grow, like, what does that look like? But you get everybody aligned, and then it's, so what does that mean? And what does that mean? The most shocking things that we see in the what does that mean fall into three categories. One, we frequently see that marketing content and programs and sales enablement are so disconnected from each other. And think about how incoherent that conversation is with a prospect coming in, right? They're literally seeing one thing from one part of the organization, something different, right? So that's one issue. One of the other big issues we see all the time, I talked about earlier, the systems, but really the degree to which the systems don't actually federate. I think one of the comments earlier, was not only like, how do we get to the point of getting organizations on the same page, but like, how does everybody sort of see the same thing? Well, if they have different data sets, right, as opposed to like one federated view of the customer, That's a disconnect. The last one that we see all the time that is the most shocking is we do what we call a stewardship analysis, where we literally take the functional org chart and we lay it on its side and say, hey, who owns the customer at different stages? And guess what? There are these giant vortices, these giant black holes that are like, exist on your chart because you've got people that are overlapping in their ownership, and then you've got large phases of the journey that nobody's owning. And so, like, literally when you have these conversation tracks, you can actually start to ask those questions about, how does our org model stack up against us? How does our data model? How do our content upstream and downstream? And then you can start to see whether or not you actually have like continuous experience and continuous insight, or whether you have interrupts in all of those.
It's so funny. I'm sitting here laughing at myself because I can't tell you how many times I'd spend month, 2 months, 3 months negotiating a deal with an executive, right? And you've got all of this business analysis, ROI modeling, like this is what matters, blah, 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 blah. Close the deal, get the DocuSign, schedule your kickoff call. That kickoff call comes, that executive's nowhere to be found.
Right.
I show up, the users, to your point now, the users come into the kickoff call and you start regurgitating all the stuff that we're doing, what we're going to accomplish. And like, that's not what I want to do, or that's not what I'm doing. And then my team gets mad at me because I sold the wrong deal. Like, you get this whole blow up, right? But that's got to be one of those vortexes you're talking about, right? Like just the handoffs and the different people and the users versus the buyers. It's super fascinating.
Well, it's a big gap too in post-sale demand. Like, we're not talking enough about that concept. Post-sale demand is really important, because for a SaaS company, like the number, I'm not going to mention names, in our universe, the number of the software vendors that we've all interacted with that are so focused on acquisition, they don't seem to really care post-sale. And there's a lot of eating each other's lunches right now. There's a lot of turnover right now in, for example, marketing automation. Like, we're seeing a lot of stuff going between a lot of the major players, and 9 times out of 10, it's because the one who owned the relationship wasn't doing anything. But post-sale demand, is one of those areas that it's so critical. And when you talk about the example, right? So, okay, let's say maybe you had to disconnect, right? But once you finally get in that conversation, how do you get that person who signed the DocuSign back in the mix? How do you actually have a program and a conversation track to keep them engaged so that you don't have that issue?
Yeah, I mean, even with the rise of PLG and kind of self-service and platform being kind of a table stake, right? Like, you need to deliver value in order to even form a customer relationship these days. Like, that just seems like that exacerbates that trend, to an nth degree. What are you seeing like today? You mentioned like the last couple of years, with the rise of efficient growth and also some of these new business models. Like, how are you seeing marketing impacted by that on that customer side of the journey, right? Like, once we've actually gotten them in the door, we're trying to foster usage, we're trying to avoid churn, all those key metrics in SaaS. But what are some of those shifts that you're seeing around this concept?
Yeah, with existing customers and in that post-sale demand arc, right? I think that there's a couple of things that we're seeing. One of them is, consistently, PLG folks, they think that they didn't need to do any marketing to acquire someone. They don't really need to do any marketing after the fact. And we're seeing a lot of challenges there where their longer term growth, their evolution as a company, sort of eventually hits a plateau. And in particular, they just happily, spend more and more on paid search over and over again. And by the way, we've seen the CACs for PLG companies that we're interacting with, like, just go through the roof. I mean, just cost of acquisition is accelerating, and the return on it is going down. And so, like, if most of your go-to-market program is predicated on paid search or on paid social, I mean, you need to start shifting into some different areas. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the rise of field marketing. We're seeing, particularly we tend to be in a little bit more upper tier segments that are considered purchases that are, call it 50 to 150K. So not like a $500 thing, but we're seeing a lot more like, hey, we need to actually have a live program. And so I think that's the other thing that we're seeing on the post-sale side is organizations starting to realize, so many organizations have gone out and said like, oh, well, hey, for customer marketing, we have Gainsight. And I'm like, how is Gainsight a strategy? It's a platform.
Right.
It's not a strategy, right? But I've literally heard that so many times. And what we're starting to see is we're actually starting to see increasing emphasis on live engagement, because the digital, even if you're a customer, even if you trust the organization, like people are just delete, things are not getting in the inbox. I just think live interaction is so much more important, and it still needs to be orchestrated. So I don't think our investments in market automation, personalization, and sales enablement, like I don't think any of that is bad. I just think we've got to revert back to the live interaction is actually what's cutting through right now, not the digital interaction.
What do you see in terms of like along the lines of that same concept? Like there's this, I would say general market move away from the CMO as they were, right? As the head of demand, as the head of marketing, for right or wrong, into, CRO, CGO, CCO, whatever is relevant for that org. Do you think some of that is rooted in, the CMO's historic focus on acquisition versus, what is really coming up as a trend, which is also kind of exacerbated by the fact that we've been charging our existing customer base more and more and more as a way to maintain growth over the last 24, 36 months. And that definitely, drives some breakage there as well. But like just the need to kind of revamp that customer lifecycle view into a true lifecycle. I guess the first question, do you think some of that's driven or what's driving that change in kind of leadership? And then, what types of changes are organizations truly looking for as a result of that?
Yeah, I think, and we talk about this in the Chief Growth Officer's Handbook.
A convenient book that will describe all of these principles.
Exactly. Actually, one of the things we do talk about in there, I think is highly relevant, and again, comes back to the customer journey, like cheat code for us and for the go-to-market view we have. For far too long, the CMO's role has been defined by the person who's in charge of marketing functions. That has nothing to do with anything. So like you have marketers who define their entire career and their self-worth and their leadership in terms of, oh, I have a product marketing team and I have an event marketing team and I have a fill in the blank marketing this, fill in the blank marketing this. And they like want to have 40, 50, 100, 150 people reporting them. That is their whole reason for being. And the big thing that we do in the Chief Growth Officer's Handbook is we poke a hole in that and question, why should you have someone's role be defined by owning functions? What you should do is have a role that is about orchestrating the engagement. And so we argue that product marketing functions should actually be sitting inside of a product organization, underneath a chief product officer. Like let the engagement interaction with that product and the other elements related to that sit elsewhere. Let brand and corporate identity and PR, AR actually sit underneath a chief communications officer. Separate those out, right? And then all the demand marketing functions should sit underneath someone who is a commercial leader, who we're calling chief growth officer, but who would have sales function, would have demand marketing function, would have growth and go-to-market and RevOps functions, would also have the technology stack supporting them as well. And the thing is that it's basically arguing, and back to the cheat code, right, that the customer journey stewardship should be the thing that defines the holistic leadership around and support of that journey. And so that is, that could be a pre-sale growth officer, could be a post-sale growth officer. It doesn't have to be a single growth officer. You don't even have to call him a growth officer. But who's architecting that pre and post-sale motion and making sure that those sales and marketing, customer success, and technology and operations elements are working together,
regardless of where they sit.
Yeah. Well, we say that, and yet think about, I mean, like I just became the Antichrist. I mean, I literally just said like basically the entire CMO role has no purpose. But we need to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a fundamental change in mentality, as you mentioned, from function really into, what area of the relationship of impact am I stewarding there? So, although that may not be a popular concept, it's certainly one that, again, is rooted in logic.
Well, if you look at the stats, the CMO tenure is continuing to drop, right? So
totally.
you're pointing something out.
Yeah, you just jumped on. I was literally going to say something just like that, Josh, right? Like that's exactly. And it's interesting that for me and my business, so let me tell you something about my ICP. Our ICP is bifurcated. So we've worked with a lot of great CMOs, but the CMOs we work with are kind of enlightened to what we just talked about and know that even though they're the CMO, they need to be acting in the kind of orchestrating way. And then otherwise, we have a lot of heads of sales, chief revenue officers, CEOs that bring us in. Like you'd immediately assume because we're focusing around demand marketing and improving that like we're just a marketing sale, but like we're frequently not a marketing sale because we're coming at things saying, hey, the way you were doing marketing, is not sustainable.
Yeah, we used to call that the change catalyst, right? Like who within this organization understands that things need to change, and it obviously has the authority to go out and make those changes. So
Right.
lot of alignment around that concept. So Adam, we always assume that LinkedIn's the best way for folks to engage with you and so on, but like where should they go to learn more about, yourself, connect with you, understand more about Annuitas, or where can they engage?
Yeah, I mean, I would go Google Chief Growth Officer Handbook, Google Annuitas. We're obviously at annuitas.com. But, in all those cases, we've got a lot of content. We've always been trying to give back to the community. We've always been trying to get out there and educate people. And so we've put a lot of content out there over the years. So if you head over to our website, our resource center's got a ton of content. So even if we don't get an opportunity to work together, hopefully we can help people see things in a different way. And as I said, we did, Martin Schneider and I co-wrote Chief Growth Officer's Handbook together. And it was through that lens of like, let's think about orchestrating go-to-market execution differently. And I happen to think it's good. I think it's worth a read to challenge, what you're thinking today, how you're approaching things today. So I think it's a great way to engage, through the book.
Well, there's certainly a need for change in the market, predominantly communicated by results or lack thereof. So yeah, would definitely encourage folks to head over there, check out the book, connect with Adam. Great topic. I think the customer journey is one, as we open this one with, that we talk a ton about, but probably needs to go much deeper and get into a functional capacity versus where that conversation's kind of resided in the past. So Adam, thanks so much for joining us on this episode. Really enjoyed having you.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Josh. We really appreciate it, guys.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're just tuning in for the first time, give us a follow, give us a subscribe. We launch these once a week. And because we're talking about books so much on this, I'll just drop a reminder that Josh and I's book, The Go-to-Market Cheat Code, comes out in January. Good friends at Wiley publishing that. And if you want to pre-order it, it's available on Amazon now. So yeah, give it a look-see. Other than that, thanks again for joining us on another episode of The Cheat Code.